This is Land of Havilah, Ezra 3. There's been a miraculous fulfillment of the word of the Lord because he's brought a remnant of his people back from the Babylonian captivity to the promised land. It's an upholding of his word to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, and maybe others. As of here in chapter 3, Zerubbabel has returned and over 49,000 with him. Ezra's not with them yet. He won't arrive in Jerusalem for another 80 years, which will be chapter 7 of this book. In the first year of the first arrivals, verse 1, when the 7th month had come and the children of Israel were in the cities, the people gathered themselves together as one man to Jerusalem. Then Jeshua the son of Jozadak stood up with his brothers the priests, and Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and his brothers, and built the altar of the God of Israel to offer burnt offerings on it, as it is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. In spite of their fear because of the peoples of the surrounding lands, they set the altar on its base, and they offered burnt offerings on it to Yahweh, even burnt offerings morning and evening. Comment in verse 1, it's still the first year of their arrival, and the 7th month has come, meaning the 7th month on the Hebrew calendar, which is September or October for us. In verse 1, they all gathered in Jerusalem, and if we know the law, we know why, because it's time to celebrate the Feast of Tents, Leviticus 23:34. It's one of the 3 yearly feasts in which, quote, all your males shall appear, Exodus 23:14-17. But it was better for the entire household to go, Deuteronomy 12:7. They don't have a temple set up yet. However, as of verse 2, they do have an altar for animal sacrifice. In verse 3, they must be outnumbered by the non-Israelites in the surrounding lands because they fear their sacrifices will anger them. They sacrificed anyway. In verse 3, they commenced the continual morning and evening burnt offering of a lamb, as required by the law of Moses, Exodus 29:38. And since it was the 7th month, verse 4, they kept the Feast of Tents, as it is written, and offered the daily burnt offerings by number, according to the ordinance, as the duty of every day required. And afterward the continual burnt offering, the offerings of the new moons, of all the set feasts of Yahweh that were consecrated, and of everyone who willingly offered a freewill offering to Yahweh. From the first day of the 7th month they began to offer burnt offerings to Yahweh, but the foundation of Yahweh's temple was not yet laid. Comment and explanation of verses 4-6, Yahweh set out a calendar of 7 yearly feasts for Israel in Leviticus 26. As far as sacrifices, he commanded the continual lamb morning and evening, plus in Numbers 28 and 29 he commanded additional sacrifices every Sabbath day, every new moon, and on each day of the 7 yearly feasts. In verses 4-6 they began keeping this schedule of sacrifices, but in verse 5 it was only for the feasts that were, quote, consecrated, end quote, meaning they weren't set up yet for the Day of Atonement because that required a functioning temple, Leviticus 16:12. In verse 6, they haven't started construction of the temple yet. Verse 7, they also gave money to the masons and to the carpenters. They also gave food, drink, and oil to the people of Sidon and Tyre, to bring cedar trees from Lebanon to the sea to Joppa, according to the grant that they had from Cyrus, king of Persia. Comment, that was the first mention of King Cyrus's grant. It was for purchase of timber and stone for temple construction, Ezra 6:4. So they had more funds than the $39 million worth the Jews contributed in the last chapter. They used some of the funds in verse 7 to reimburse the people of Tyre and Sidon for floating them timber by sea, which they did, to the nearby coast at Joppa, and they retained masons and carpenters. Verse 8, now in the 2nd year of their coming to God's house at Jerusalem, in the 2nd month, Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Jeshua the son of Jozadak and the rest of their brothers, the priests and the Levites, and all those who had come out of the captivity to Jerusalem, began the work and appointed the Levites from 20 years old and upward to have the oversight of the work of Yahweh's house. Comment, King Cyrus made Sheshbazzar governor, Ezekiel 5:14, but it seems the people give more recognition to Zerubbabel. Within a few years, the prophet Haggai will be referring to Zerubbabel as governor, Haggai 2:2. Jeshua the son of Jozadak in verse 8 will eventually be recognized as high priest, Haggai 1:12. In verse 8, they began the work under the leadership and oversight of Zerubbabel, Yeshua, and the other priests and the Levites. But, quote, all those who had come out of captivity, end quote, had a hand in it. It'll wind up taking about 20 years with some major political problems along the way. Verse 9. Then Jeshua stood with his sons and his brothers, Kadmiel and his sons, the sons of Judah, together to have the oversight of the workmen in God's house, the sons of Henadad with their sons and their brothers, the Levites. Comment, this is another Jeshua, a Levite from chapter 2, verse 40. He and some other fellow Levites had primary oversight of the day-to-day construction. Verse 10. When the builders laid the foundation of Yahweh's temple, they set the priests in their clothing with trumpets, with the Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals, to praise Yahweh according to the directions of David, king of Israel. They sang to one another in praising and giving thanks to Yahweh, for he is good, for his loving kindness endures forever toward Israel. All the people shouted with a great shout when they praised Yahweh, because the foundation of Yahweh's house had been laid. Comment in verse 8, they began the work in the second month of the second calendar year after they arrived. In verse 11, they had a groundbreaking ceremony with a crowd in attendance. Yahweh commanded silver trumpets to be blown at times of gladness, Numbers 10:10. Later, David organized the Levites to continually serve Yahweh with vocal and instrumental music of praise, 1 Chronicles 25, 1-7. So the musicians are in full swing. They laid the foundation to music, trumpets, and a great shout of the people in verse 11. Coming up, it was a most emotional event, verse 12. But many of the priests and Levites and heads of fathers' households, the old men who had seen the first house, when the foundation of this house was laid before their eyes, wept with a loud voice. Many also shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not discern the noise of the shout of joy from the noise of the weeping of the people, for the people shouted with a loud shout, and the noise was heard far away. Comment in verse 12, the oldest among them remembered the old temple. They suffered the destruction of it in real time, and now they're overcome with emotion, seeing the foundation of it laid again. They wept with a loud voice, as did many others. But for some it was more like a shout of celebration. The wailing and exultation were heard far away. Ezra 4 is next.